Hi everyone. So we didn't really have much time to go over the discussion on Wednesday, so I kind of wanted to go more in depth on it right now because this is foundational and we really want you guys to have a good understanding. So let's talk about problem one first. So this is a data types question. Basically, we give you a couple different variables and we want you to figure out what the data type is. So if we look at the instructions, it says fill in the blanks, and as an example, a is equal to 5, so the data type of a is an int. So if you're not sure, you can also use the type. You can use type and the variable name, and it'll output the type of the variable. Okay, so let's look at variable 1. First thing we notice is that it's a bunch of text and there are quotes surrounding it. So that means this is a string. All right, next one, variable 2 is equal to 5. So this is kind of given to us in the instructions that basically a whole number, any whole number is an integer. So this is an int. Now variable 3 is equal to 1.29. So since this is not a whole number, it's a decimal number, this is a float. Okay. Now let's look at this function. Variable 4 is equal to g. So this one is a little tricky. So g is a function. Now this one might be a little confusing, the next one, because it's essentially, it looks very similar to variable 4. So if we're not sure, let's try using the type function. So if we want to do this, it's a little bit hard within the notebook, or not the notebook, but within the file. So we're going to do this in a terminal. So I'm going to come up here, and I press terminal, new terminal, and one should pop up right here. Okay, so I'm going to cd into the folder where this is. Okay, now I'm just going to type in Python 3 minus I, and then the file name. Okay, this printed out beep beep because this function prints out beep beep, and then the interactive Python pretty much runs the file. Okay, so let's try finding the type of G first. So yeah, so it says it's a function. Now let's try the type of calling G. This is a Boolean value that outputs, because in this line 24, we say return true. So the output of this function is true. And the reason why it's Boolean specifically is because this is calling the function. G and then parentheses calls the function. Typically, functions have some input value. So like, for example, like this. And you would call like G of like whatever the input's supposed to be. So let's just call it 5. This is calling the function. But since this doesn't have an input, this still calls the function, but there's just nothing in the input. So calling the function, the output is a return value, and our return value here is true. And true and false are Boolean statements. This is a Boolean value. Okay. Now let's look at this one. One thing to note is that this has brackets at the end. So any set of numbers or set of values that is surrounded by brackets is a list. This is a list. Now this one looks very similar to the previous, but there's one key difference, which is that it's surrounded by parentheses. So this one might be a little bit more difficult because we don't normally work with this data type, but because it's surrounded by parentheses, that means it's a tuple. And a tuple can be like any size. They're just a bunch of key properties of tuples that make them different than lists or any other data type similar to them. Now, variable 8, look at this one. Oops. Okay, so this one, you'll notice two things. One is that it's surrounded by curly brackets, and then another is that there's some value, a colon, another value followed by a comma. If you have anything in this format, this is a dictionary. Okay, now let's move on to the next problem. So this one is using different operators for division. So we want to observe what happens in each of these scenarios. Recall the difference between normal, floor, and modulo division, and describe these differences in the markdown cell below. So there's no markdown cell right here. Sorry, my cat. Okay, so if you weren't sure, one thing we could do is work in the terminal. So let's do 5 divided by 2. So this outputs the exact value. Doesn't round, it doesn't give anything else. This returns the exact value. Okay, now let's try floor division. So this has 2 signs, 2 flashes. Okay, so let's think about this. For floor div 3 is 1. This is the whole number of times that it goes into this number. So let's say we tried a different set of numbers, so like 5 and 3. 5 goes into 3 one time. So this is the quotient. Then lastly, modulo division. If you weren't sure, we can try this again. So 459 mod 4. Okay, let's think about this. 459 divided by 4 is 114, and the remainder is 3. And output is 3. So that means that mod returns the remainder. All right, now let's move on to number 3. So this is a string indexing problem. So indexing can be a little bit challenging, but we're hoping that these introductory problems and then later problems that you'll see in the course will make them a lot easier to work with. So let's look at this one. In the following problem, use a string indexing to turn the words below into a new word that is part of the original word or modified version of it. So an example of this is the word strongest and then output strong. Okay, so let's try this. So there are a couple of different words we could do. We could do fast, just this much. Test, like somebody said in discussion. Let's do fast. So remember, strings are 0 indexed. Basically everything in Python is 0 indexed. So we start at 0. So the index of f is 0, then 1, 2, 3. Okay. So on initial attempt, it might be tempting to say 0 to 3. This colon represents through, so like everything between 0 and 3. But watch what happens when we run this. It only gets fast. And that's because this 3 is not inclusive. So we have to put the index of the last letter we want plus 1. So we send it to 4, and this is what happens. Get fast. Okay, let's try this one. So there's out, there's side. That's pretty much it. Let's do side this time. So let's check our starting index. 0, 1, 2, 3. We want it to go to 3, 4, 5, 6. So we actually want it to go to the end of the word. And instead of having to do like 3 to 7 or something like that, we can just do 3 and then the colon. And that means that 3 and everything after that. It includes 3 and then everything after that. So let's try it out in the interactive Python. Side. Gives us side. Okay. Last word. A race car. Let's try ace. So our starting index is 0, 1, 2, 3, plus 1 is 4. And let's try it out in here. Oops, I meant to do through ace. Let me fix that here. All right, let's go into the next problem. Oops. This is also another string indexing problem. So we want to reverse a palindrome. Okay, so this one is tat-a-rat-a-tat. Okay. So we want to reverse it. So first, we want our starting index to be the last number. So instead of counting the indices, to reference the last number, we do -1. And then also if you want to reference the second to last, it's -2 and so on. Do -1. And we want everything after that. And then we do this to show another one to show that we want to include every single element. Typically, the second colon is meant as a step. So if this were like 2, for example, we would skip like every other number. But in this case, we want to include everything. So let's try this. Oh no. What's wrong here? Nope. I think this is a great teaching moment because if you're ever not sure of anything in this class, just look it up. So let's open a new tab. And let's say, since we want to search up how to reverse a string, let's just do exactly that. How to reverse string in Python. See, I've clearly done this before. So let's open this one. Got the order wrong. So we want everything, but then we want to start at -1. So let's try this. we got it. Same thing applies for the second one. And I don't think we need to output it here. Okay. So let's look at this next one. Take your favorite equation or anything that you find on the internet and turn it into a function. Okay. I kind of like Pythagorean theorem, so let's do that one. Okay, so when we make a function, the first thing to do is start with def, and then we put our function name. So always make something that is very descriptive. So if you put like def, like function, func or something, nobody knows what's happening in that function. Something more descriptive is like Pythagorean. And now we want our parameters. So remember, Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Let's say you wanted to find c. So we have our parameters a and b because we want to find c. We know a and b. After defining the parameters, put our colon here. Now we write what the function has to do. So if you remember, first let's write this out as a function. Let's write a comment. Solves for c in the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so now we know what this function does. Now let's write a comment on what we want it to do. So we first know that a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. To solve for c, we just take the square root of this. So that means we want c equal to the square root of a squared plus b squared. Now let's translate this into Python. C is equal to square root of a squared. Remember the squared operator is double stars plus b squared. And then I return c. Okay, we're getting this squiggly line, and I believe this is because we need to import the square root. So instead of doing that, yeah, so it tells you right here, square root is not defined, and that's because the square root function comes from the math module, and we'll talk more about importing modules later. So let's not worry about this for now. Let's do this another way. So another way to take the square root is to take it to the 1/2 power. So we'll do that instead. Okay. Let's try and see if this works. So I'm going to exit out in the terminal, and then I'm just going to run it again. Okay. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Pythagorean. Let's do it again. Okay. So one triangle that we can try that we already know of is the 3, 4, 5 triangle. So if I put in 3 and 4, it should output 5. And outputted 5. Yay. Also note that this is a float. Sometimes you will encounter certain operations that require integers or require floats. So be careful about this. We'll talk a little bit more about changing types of variables at some point in the semester. Okay, next problem. We're writing a function called last digit, which returns the last digit of a number as a string. And the tip is to convert an int or a float to a string, use the str function. If you want to convert a string to an int or a float, use int or float respectively. Okay. So let's think about this problem. We want to return the last value. How can we go about this? Well, we can do this a number of ways. First, we know that we want to output it as a string. So maybe we can change the type of the input value to a string and then index the last number. So num string is equal to, and we'll use this operator that they provided for us, str num. And then last digit is equal to the last digit of the num digit. Oops, num string. Then we're going to return last digit. Okay, let's see if this works. So I need to exit out of here. So anytime you change the file, especially functions, you need to exit out of the terminal before running it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Exiting it out, opening the interactive Python again. So let's try 2019. Oops, I did a bad thing. If you ever want to exit out, do Control-C, both on Mac and Windows. So we're still in the interactive Python. Make sure to close your parentheses, guys. Okay, we get 9, and it's a string. As you can see the quotes right here. Okay, another way to do this, so let me put these in comments. Another way to do this is a little bit trickier, but if you take any number and take the modulus of 10 with 10, it returns the last number. So let's say we did that. Last digit is equal to num mod 10. This should give us the last digit of the number. And then, because we want this to be a string, let's convert this to a string. So use str of the last digit. And then let's return. Before this, if you don't believe me that mod 10 will give us the last digit, let's try it. Try it on a couple numbers. So let's try on this number right here. It gives us 8. What if that was a fluke? 500 mod 10. We know this one should be 0. It is. What about 25 mod 10? This one should be 5. It's 5. So now I hope you guys believe me. Let's exit out and test our function. Last digit of this one, and we get 8 as a string. Okay. Next problem. Okay. So we're going to attempt this problem, and the min and max functions would be really useful. But this problem it tells us that it is tricky. So first, let's run these. This gate outputted 3. And this outputted -20. So if you can tell by the name, the min function outputs the minimum of a set of numbers. It can also take in a list. Max does the opposite. It outputs the maximum value in a set of numbers. Okay. So now we have this function, and it's supposed to return x times x plus y times y, where x and y are the two largest members of the positive numbers A, B, and C. Okay. So there are a couple of ways to do this. And I think first, we need to identify the two max numbers. So if we think about this case first, just visually without like code or anything, we know the two largest numbers are 2 and 3, meaning that the number cannot be the minimum number. So let's find our min number. So let's find min num is equal to min of A, B, C. Okay. Mm. So my original thinking had to do with ways to do it that you don't know yet. So we're going to try a different method. So we want to return x squared plus y squared, basically. For x and y are the two largest numbers. So what we can do is try different things out. So let's say we want to try the max of A and B first. And then we'll try the max of B and C squared. But that's not our only options. We can also try the max of A and C. Oops. Plus the max of A and C, AB, BC, AC, BC. So this allows us to try, like, let's look at this one. 2 for this first part, and then 3 here, and then 3 here, and then 3 here. This allows us to always pick the maximum of 2 elements, and that are all possible. So A, B, B, C, or A, C, and B, C. Now note that we have 2 values here, but we can only pick one. Only one of them is correct. So if you noticed when I matched these up, only one of them was correct, and it was this one. What property does this hold? This one has 2 distinct values, whereas this one has 1 value that's distinct. This one takes in 3 twice. And that makes this larger than this one, because this is 2 and 3, or this is 3 and 3. So to find the correct value, we take the minimum of the whole thing. This is what we want to output. I'm just moving this into the return value. And then if we try this, uh, 2 of 3. Try another one that's like not in order. So the second one. 34. That'll be 25 plus 9, which is 34. Okay, great. So we know that works. There are a number of different ways to do this. This one might not be the most intuitive. I would have done it using some ideas that we will talk about on Monday. But yeah, if you have questions on this one, definitely come to office hours. This is very difficult to understand. Okay, last part, coding hygiene. What does this entail? Use descriptive variables. So don't represent variables as single letters because then it's very hard to understand what's going on, especially for somebody else, not just you who is reading the code. And this is very important when you start research or you start a job where you have to share code with others. Because if somebody doesn't understand what's going on, nobody's gonna be happy. And then again with you, like if you're writing code and then like you stop writing and you're like, okay, let me come back tomorrow. You come back tomorrow and you're like, what the heck is going on? It's not a good idea. Make sure that your code is very readable and that you are able to understand what's happening. Second step is use comments frequently. Comments can be formed using this hashtag or 2 quotes or 3 quotes. 3 quotes allow you to write in multiple lines, whereas the rest only do a single line. Stay consistent with line spacing so it's easy to understand. Yeah, so we want to fix this code. So this obviously outputs the volume of a sphere because we did this in class, I believe. So let's change the name of the function to volume of sphere. Okay. Now let's look at the parameter. It takes in something called R. That is not descriptive, but looking at this, I know that it's radius. It's the radius of this sphere. So change this to R. And we'll change R to radius. Now let's leave a comment on what it does. Returns the volume of a sphere given the radius. All right. So this is 4/3 pi and then R cubed. So this looks so much better now. All right. So that was it for the discussion. I hope it made it's like more clear and that everything makes sense. If not, please come to office hours. The homework is very similar to these problems. And I hope that they're a lot easier to understand after this video. Thanks, guys.